The president announced a new 50% tariff on.
Over time, we become too dependent on the United States as our biggest customer, with more than 90% of our steel exports going south of the border.
They use tariffs to take our businesses, not only steel, other businesses too.
We must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects.
What stunned policymakers wasn't just the economic pain, it was the way Canada delivered it. Ottawa didn't issue loud threats, retaliatory tariffs, or chest-thumping press conferences. Instead, they opted for something far more devastating: silence. No official bans, no WTO disputes. Canada simply redirected its steel inward, prioritizing domestic industries and projects. While Detroit's factories fell quiet, Hamilton and Windsor roared to life. Parking lots overflowed with Canadian workers returning to full shifts. Furnaces blazed red through the night. Ottawa had found a way to defend its economy without firing a single rhetorical shot, and Washington had no legal grounds to fight back. The collapse wasn't just material, it was symbolic. Trump's tariffs were supposed to project an image of a self-reliant America, unafraid of foreign supply chains. Instead, the sight of Detroit's idle machines became a haunting metaphor: America's industrial might silenced by its closest ally. Meanwhile, just across the border, Canadian plants glowed with new vitality, their steel redirected toward domestic growth and green development. For the first time in decades, Canada wasn't the junior partner in North American industry, it was rewriting the rules of the game. In mid-July 2025, America's industrial heartland was rattled to its core. A seemingly routine tariff adjustment by President Donald Trump, doubling import duties on metals to 50%, triggered a cascade of events that nobody in Washington, Detroit, or Ottawa had fully anticipated. Overnight, Canada, long considered a dependable steel partner, pulled the plug on its southbound exports. Customs data revealed the jaw-dropping truth: steel shipments didn't just decline, they vanished. Freight trains once clattering across the border stood abandoned. Ports that once hummed with shipments fell silent. Detroit, the proud engine of America's auto industry, suddenly found itself gasping for steel, its lifeblood cut off without warning. Within days, Detroit's factories flipped from roaring efficiency to eerie stillness. Assembly lines at Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler stalled as essential materials dried up. Thousands of workers were sent home on reduced shifts. Costs skyrocketed. Ford alone reported $2.5 billion in losses in just the first half of the year, and those weren't just abstract figures on paper. They translated into shortened work weeks, shuttered plants, and paychecks shrinking across Michigan. Pickup trucks and SUVs, once the cash cows of the American auto market, became financial sinkholes as input costs surged beyond control. What looked like a tariff war on paper had morphed into a social and economic upheaval across the Midwest. The shocking speed of Canada's pivot wasn't improvisation, it was preparation. Years before Trump's tariff bombshell, Ottawa had invested heavily in a $1 billion steel modernization fund, pushing factories toward electric arc furnaces and hydrogen-based processes. This meant Canada's industry wasn't just producing more steel, it was producing cleaner, cheaper, and globally compliant steel. By the time tariffs hit, the infrastructure to pivot inward was already in place. Canada hadn't stumbled into this crisis response. It had engineered it. The US scrambled to respond. Congressional hearings erupted, especially from states like Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin, where manufacturing is a lifeline. Lawmakers accused Canada of building an invisible steel wall, environmental regulations and carbon standards that effectively excluded US steel. But when the issue reached the World Trade Organization, America hit a brick wall. Canada hadn't broken any rules. No tariffs. No bans. Just a ruthless prioritization of domestic needs and compliance with green standards. Washington realized, too late, that it had no legal or diplomatic lever to pull. Canada didn't frame its moves as retaliation. Instead, it presented them as a national strategy, a way to safeguard its economy while embracing. Steel became more than a commodity, it became a diplomatic and industrial weapon. By shifting to recycled inputs, Ottawa built a circular economy, cutting dependence on volatile imports. Tax rebates and incentives spurred investment in green technology. Within 18 months, recycled steel accounted for over 60% of Canada's total output, a staggering figure that positioned the nation as a leader in low-emission manufacturing. While US automakers scrambled to source steel from South Korea and Japan at inflated prices, Canada was signing long-term contracts with Europe and Asia. Volkswagen, BMW, and French infrastructure firms inked deals with Ottawa, eager to secure green steel that exempted their products from crushing EU carbon taxes. The contrast couldn't have been starker. America was stuck with outdated, coal-heavy furnaces and rising costs, while Canada was cashing in on clean energy and carbon credentials. What began as a tariff scuffle had blossomed into a global power shift. For Ottawa, steel became a passport to the global economy of tomorrow. By aligning with EU climate rules and securing carbon certifications, Canada positioned its steel industry as a golden ticket into the world's toughest markets. The US, in contrast, became increasingly isolated, burdened with dirty production and rising trade barriers. What once looked like a straightforward trade dispute revealed itself as something far bigger, a struggle over who would lead the green industrial revolution. And Canada, quietly but decisively, seized that mantle. The story of this steel shock is more than tariffs and trade. It is a lesson in vision, patience, and preparation. While Washington sought quick wins with protectionist tariffs, Ottawa invested in the future, sustainability, resilience, and self-sufficiency. The result, a Canada that is no longer dependent on its southern neighbor, but a nation shaping the global industrial narrative. Detroit's silence and Hamilton's roar tell the same story from opposite sides of the border. In today's world, power belongs not to the loudest player, but to the smartest strategist. The steel standoff between Canada and the United States is no longer just about tariffs, factories, or trade balances. It has become a mirror reflecting two different visions of the future. One is locked in old habits, clinging to coal-fired furnaces and short-term political wins. The other embraces innovation, sustainability, and global leadership. Canada has proven that silent strategy can outmaneuver loud policy, and that long-term preparation always trumps reactive politics. The question now is not whether the US can outcompete Canada on price, but whether it has the courage to reinvent itself for a new industrial era. Because in this battle of steel, the true war isn't between nations, it's between the past and the future. On one side of the border, silence lingers over Detroit's vast industrial yards. Workers, once proud of their craft, now stand in unemployment lines or wait for reduced shifts. Communities dependent on auto plants and heavy industry are grappling with uncertainty. Across the river in Windsor or Hamilton, however, the atmosphere is strikingly different. Cafes are crowded again, worker parking lots overflow, and shifts stretch late into the night. This sharp contrast is not just economic, it is emotional. It has fractured the long-held belief that Canada's prosperity was tied at the hip to America's industrial rhythm. For the first time in modern history, Canadian workers feel liberated, while their American counterparts feel abandoned. Washington now faces an uncomfortable truth: tariffs that were designed to protect American jobs have instead fueled layoffs, soaring costs, and strategic vulnerability. Congress can no longer afford to view trade through the lens of short-term wins.